everyone. We are live for the second debate of Iron Minds. And I've got with me today Anas and Chris. So, hey guys, how's it going?
How's it going?
How are you?
Pretty good, that's cool. So, we're going to talk about the RPE debate. And so, more specifically, the motion is going to be that for building maximal strength, the lifter's perceived effort is a truer guide to the training dose than the objective numbers on the bar. And so, in other words, the body adapts to the stress that it feels and not to the load that it can be measured lifting. And so Chris is going to be the affirmative for that, whereas Anas is going to be the negative. And so we recorded, an episode with both Chris and Anas in the past few months. So if you want to take a look at, their career as a coach, like in general, aside from these specific matter, feel free to watch them. And so basically, exactly like last time, the debate is going to be structured following certain sections, right? So there's going to be an opening statement where basically Chris and Anas will state their case without, rebutting or without referring to the other person's statement. Then there's a 6-minute phase where for 6 minutes, Chris will be able to, come up with a rebuttal for Anas and then the opposite. Then there's the cross-examination phase where basically one asks questions and the other answers. And it's only questions. So there's no other way of interacting with the other person. And say, like, if Chris asks a question to Anas and he feels like Anas is deviating or going on a tangent or whatever, Chris can interrupt Anas. Finally, there's the closing statement where basically, they're going to come up with their best final case in light of everything that happened before. And then there's an audience Q&A for anyone who wants to ask questions. And so basically, Chris is going to get started with his opening statement on how he thinks he can best support the motion. And after 10 minutes, Anas will come up with his opening statement. So I would recommend both of you guys to come up with a timer so that you can see the clock. And yeah, Chris, when you're ready, we can get started.
All right. Put this timer up.
Yep, 10 minutes.
Ready whenever.
Perfect, let's go.
Well, Samuele, thank you for having me on. And Anas, thank you for being here for this debate. I look forward to having a lot of fun with this. So without further ado, I'll start off. So pretty much in opening, our daily 1RM may vary 5 to 10% depending on sleep stressors or fatigue. So with that being said, if you had an example of, let's say you prescribe to somebody, I want you to take 85% of a set or 85% of your single according to your 1RM, your 1 rep max. This can variate. So on a good day, if recovery is doing well, something that you had at 85%, 80%, let's say, would be around at 7. Now, if variables are not as set up well for the day, you could end up taking something that should have been around at 7, 85%, 80%, and end up making that at 9 to 10. Now, what this does is this leaves the athlete stressed, frustrated, potentially emotionally distraught. And so with this, I argue that RPE, because it's so malleable, because of the fact that it's so dynamic, because of the fact that it can adapt and be so flexible towards what the goals are for the day, instead of something like a fixed percentage rate, which fixed percentage rates are useful, and I'm not saying that they're not. But while using RP, I would say that uh, many teams, including the team that I've been working for 8+ years, have shown that we've been able to create much success off of strictly RPE and mastering that system. Um, Now, later on, I can go through a lot of results, a lot of anecdotes. I can go through proof. I can go through some studies and things of that matter. But I'll actually open up with there are some studies that I've cited from Helms, Graham, and Cleather, as shown with RPE groups often training at consistent intensities, various lifter to lifter. Um, they've maintained or achieved greater gains and adherence than pure percentage based training. Also, in recent meta analysis, RP is ranked well above pure percentage based training for maximal strength gains. Some examples of some systems or coaches or teams would be Mike T of RTS, would be Joseph Franzo Flex Training Systems, and also there could be a plethora of your favorite coaches across the entire spectrum in the sport that utilize RP. In many cases, myself, the coaches amongst my team, and coaches around the world have been able to use RP as I've said earlier, a very malleable tool where we can adapt on the day according to what the body has. And I think that the biggest flaw of pure percentage based training is that if you set a percentage base, right, 85%, 80%, 78%, 90%, whatever the case may be, depending on the lifter, certain lifters can train at higher percentages, which means that it's a higher intensity. Other lifters cannot train at those higher intensities. And especially that, this depends depending on if the lifter is a novice, advanced, or elite. In many cases, um, the elite lifters have to train at lower intensities. You could translate that in percentage, but the thing is, it's very risky if you do prescribe a particular percentage and that percentage is not there on the day, yet the lifter still takes it. It could be the difference between disrupting an entire off-season plan. It could be the difference between disrupting a prep, whether that be 3, 4, 2 weeks out. Crucial timing. So, percentage-based training can do well when utilizing RPE. However, RPE can stand on its own. It can live on its own and does not require percentage-based training. Um, and with that, I'll go ahead and close out my opening statement. It's about 5 minutes. I don't think I needed 10 minutes.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Perfect. Thank you, Chris. So yeah, that was very clear. Now, Anas, you have up to 10 minutes to come up with your opening statement. Yeah, again, as I said, you're going to focus on your own like opening statement without rebutting what Chris said, because we have a round 2 exactly designed for that. So yeah, Anas, when you want, we can get started.
Okay. All right, we can start. So, from my understanding about the motion, it's about figuring out what the stimulus for maximal strength is. We're not talking about how useful RPE is. We all know RPE is very useful, but we're trying to see what actually drives the strength. And for strength expression or just maximal strength, the biggest contributor is force production. And with force production, we know that load is a big contributor. And velocity is another big contributor. Obviously, gravity is something we always have to resist against, and it's a static. But with that being said, if we're trying to drive high force production, the load is the biggest thing we worry about. RPE at 30% of your warm-up max is not the same as the same RPE with 80% of your max. So at the end of the day, RPE is just a tool to prescribe loading, which is the stimulus for the strength. So I believe also if we're talking about like what drives the strength, it's the task itself. It's lifting the heavy weights. It's not our perception of that task. So if I come in one day and squat 200 kilos and it moves at an RPE 8, it's not the stimulus doesn't really change if I squat 200 kilos on another day, but the RPE is a little bit higher. Yes, the fatigue cost might be a little bit more, but the task is still the same. I'm still delivering the same stimulus, even though the RPE is changing, which means the RPE is not the stimulus for strength. Also, we can look at some studies. I think like the studies, there's a lot of studies, but the main studies that favor RPE, they kind of use it in an auto-regulation manner, which we know our auto-regulation helps, but we can auto-regulate with loading. We can have a range with percentages. We can have the lifter go, okay, on this day, we want you to hit anywhere between 75% and 85%, and that is sufficient. So that is another form of auto-regulation, and it kind of negates the effects of auto-regulation for RPE, and we can also auto-regulate with velocity, and I think those can be a little bit more objective. If we have a specific force demands, like a force reduction we want to hit for the day, because if we know the lifter maybe is a little bit more neurotic or they've had a lot of like life stressors, then the RPE rating can actually be also very clouded, and like that's like one downfall of RPE is because a lot of variables can interfere with it. And when there's a lot of variables that can interfere with RPE, it becomes very inaccurate and it puts a lot of, I guess, like power in the lifter's hand, where we want, as coaches, we want the most control as we can. And kind of looking at the criteria for a truer guide, we mentioned fidelity to the mechanism. So what is the stimulus that actually drives the adaptation? And I gave a couple examples of comparing two different sets with different RPEs. The load is the biggest thing here that we're trying to drive. And if we look at RPE, just regardless of loading, it does not deliver the same stimulus. If we equate RPE with 30% and 80%, the 80% group is going to make a higher strength gains just because the loading on the bar, the force demands are higher, which tells us the stimulus is not the RPE itself, it's not the perception of the task, it is the task itself. And like we can also look into the other criterias. We mentioned audibility, which is okay, do I need to confirm that that this is the RPE? For me, like if I'm watching my lifter and he tells me this is RPE 8 and I look at it and think it's like an RPE 6, then there might be a disconnect there. I always have to ask the lifter for their RPE rating. But if I look at the bar, I can see how much is loaded. I can see how fast it moved. This gives me a clear indicator of how much force we produce, hence how much stimulus we actually induced on the day. And we mentioned also like non-comparability, which means RPE 9 is different from lifter to lifter, but the biggest thing here is the absolute load on the bar matters. Someone like Jesus squatting 1,000 pounds, even though it's like 90% or 95% of his max, it's not the same stress. It's not the same fatigue cost. It's not the same stimulus as someone who is squatting 300 pounds. Maybe like a Leanne Lee squatting 300 pounds. That's not the same as squatting 1,000 pounds, just because the load on the bar is the biggest driver here. And that gives us a lot more information like about the stress, how much stimulus the person is getting and how much fatigue we're actually getting. Yes, the perception matters, but it's not the biggest contributor here. We also look at the top. I think if we use RPE strictly, but for most elite lifters, they have the skill of using RPE. But that also puts a lot of control in their hand. Like I know we've seen some cases where people kind of go overboard with the RPE. Maybe they feel a little bit too good. They go a little bit too aggressive, then they end up hurting their performance on midday. I think like Rust had a similar situation with it, like where he was feeling good, he's gaining weight, the strength is high, but now he's squatting 800 pounds. It's not the same as squatting 700 pounds. So the fatigue cost was a lot higher. But if we only look at the RPE and don't have weight caps, then the person can get into a situation where they start to run into fatigue problems or we're not delivering the stimulus. If the person is very conservative and they always undershoot, then the stimulus does not get delivered and the progress might not show up. Again, RPE is very useful. It's something I personally track too, but it's not the thing that matters the most. At the end of the day, it's a tool to prescribe loading, and we can prescribe load in different ways. And I usually use RPE as a way to track fatigue cost. If I know a lifter maybe gets fatigued from RPE 9 plus, I'm like, okay, this is the cap for the day, but the priority, the goal is to deliver the stimulus, which is this load. And if we hit somewhere in this range of this loading and the RPE doesn't get too high, you don't move too slow. Also, I can replace RPE with velocity. Okay, I don't want you to move this slow because I know when you move that slow, the fatigue cost becomes a lot higher. So loading in context, also coupled with velocity, can create a very cohesive program that also can incorporate auto regulation. But RPE on its own, just because it's very subjective and doesn't have any objective metric or loading to it, it does not stand on its own. Because how do I know? How do I prescribe if you're not prescribing RPE alongside like reps and sets and whatnot, and like you have an expectation of like how much load you want on the bar. But if you just prescribe an RPE, that can be a very wide range. But if I prescribe a specific percentage or a specific load range, I know this is how much I'm gonna get on the bar. We have a lot of studies also that show there is no correlation between RPE and strength gains. Maybe like an RPE 6 for this lifter can produce a lot of progress, but the same RPE does not produce progress for a different lifter the same way as different percentages with different RPEs don't, or like different percentages at same RPE don't produce the same progress. So that tells us that the driver of the strength is not the RPE itself, is the load on the bar, which is, I guess, like the motion for this for this debate is about the stimulus, what actually drives the stimulus. And if we look at the RPE and comparing those different loadings with similar RPEs, and when we see a different gains in strength, then that tells us that the stimulus is not the RPE itself. And we also have like a lot of studies going over load progression. Squatting maybe like 30% doesn't produce the same results as 80%, just because obviously the load and the force demands of 80% is a lot higher, which we see a linear relationship between loading and strength gains, which tells us that is also why it is a stimulus. But I think I have an extra minute, but I'll just end it there.
Sounds good. That was also very clear. And so now Chris basically has up to 6 minutes to come up with a rebuttal that is to attack Anas's opening directly, basically. So yeah, Chris, whenever you're ready, you can come up with your own rebuttal. You can set the clock for 6 minutes.
Okay. So, and I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Anas, thank you for that opening statement. So I believe that the distinct difference in between how we are understanding percentage-based training as a load and being the task, and the same thing with RPE, is how both are being seen. And one of the things you mentioned was periodization or linear progress. And what I argue with percentage-based training is that it cannot be as consistent as RPE because of the desired effect for linear progress. It just cannot take place because of the fact that variables and life stressors and things of that nature are real things. So because of that, I believe a lot of utilizing RPE through my own experience, but also many other coaches' experience, and the success, the massive, overwhelming, impactful success that they've had over a decade, decades time, is that it's about how RPE is coached. It's about how you take RPE and you teach the athlete to utilize the system. I believe that I have seen throughout time now where, and I don't knock any coach for doing this, but you have to utilize what you feel is best for you and how you can help athletes get better. And so some coaches feel a lot more comfortable or feel that they can do their best work with percentage based training, and the way that they may utilize velocity based training with percentage based training and things of that nature. But I believe we're essentially saying the same thing. I know that if we look at it in terms of how it's being seen, certain coaches' philosophy is very direct or very literal when we're talking about percentage based training and RPE, as opposed to philosophy can really determine how we see RPE in comparison to percentage. So, with that being said, our philosophy is that, or I'll speak for myself. My philosophy and what I've found well is that RPE, like I said, is so malleable. So we are seeing it as you're not working to be so precise or so perfect. And because of that, it takes off a great deal of stress off of the lifter. It allows the lifter to train fluidly, to be in the moment, and get the desired relative range of stimulus that it needs. I think that's one of the most powerful things about RPE. It's the fact that it doesn't need to be specifically 78%, 82%, and so on and so forth. The range itself has more wiggle room. Um, there was actually a case study from Helms where he ran a 8 week trial with athletes, and I think that trial defined exactly what we're talking about in terms of whether you're setting RPE, percentage based training, load cap range. It allowed the athletes to hit a range with RPE, which allows them to hit wider ranges. And the thing that I argue as well is what happens when you set a percentage base? What happens when you set a load cap? Just like if you were to set an RPE, either one, the athlete is going to be subject to emotion. They're going to be subject to greed, or they're going to be subject to moments of undisciplined training. That can happen for any athlete, regardless of any system. You can set a load cap, but the athlete might be just quote unquote feeling good, and they might go above and beyond the caps that you set. So athletes are subject to that, regardless of what system you utilize. At the end of the day, what I argue is that the body doesn't know nor understand the exact percentage that it's utilizing. It doesn't understand any of the numbers that we have programmed. It's just feeling a stimulus. And there are many studies out there that prove as long as the stimulus is intense enough, which we look at within our philosophy, or I look at within my philosophy as RP being the task that you're doing. Um, you are literally attempting to work within a range, and as long as you hit that range, that task has been completed. Um, And so I go back to pretty much, I believe it just really depends on how you're looking at both percentage based training and how you're looking at, or how you see, or what your philosophy is as it pertains to both percentage based training or RPE. Uh, Again, periodized training and the linear progress effect is something that we want, but it is nowhere near as consistent, and nor does it provide flexible but long-term adherence as RPE does. 5 minutes and 23 seconds. I'll end there.
Perfect. That was very clear. Thank you, Chris. And yeah, and as you have up to 6 minutes to come up with your rebuttal of Chris's opening statement.
Okay. All right. So I'll start. Okay. So I think the misconception here, or like maybe there's like some miscommunication about the motion itself. So the motion is not that we're saying RPE is not useful. I mean, it's something that I use, but the motion is specifically about what's a true guide. And if we're talking about what a true guide is and what the stress we experience and like the thing that drives the adaptations, we're talking about the stimulus itself. We're not asking that is RPE useful or not? I think it is very useful, and like I'm not saying like okay we shouldn't use auto regulation. It is something that we should use, but we wouldn't say that RPE is the driver of strength just because we do specific RPEs and our perception of the task is high doesn't mean we get more adaptations. It's about the loading itself, which is the motion. So just to be clear that we're talking about the stimulus here. And if you mentioned, I know you mentioned that the body responds to the stimulus or the stress. So what do you define as the stimulus? Is the stimulus the RPE itself, or is it the load that the RPE is actually prescribing? Because like if you prescribe an RPE 7 in your head, you know that this person is probably going to load somewhere in between 80% and 85%. If they feel good, they're going to load 85. If they feel bad, they're going to load closer to 80. But also, we don't want we want some control. I think giving so much control in the lifter's hand that can be detrimental because we need precision. And with the way we program nowadays, there is predictability. We don't want to show up on meet day and not really know how much a person is gonna squat. There is a process of tracking the person's fitness, like how their fatigue patterns are showing, and like we know, generally speaking, that the from like week one to like the final week of the block, we have to see a progression. And like if a progression doesn't happen, then we wouldn't just gonna keep running the same RPE hoping something changes. We make changes in loading. We make changes maybe like in the volume just to compensate for maybe like an increase in fatigue. So I think how malleable RPE is can be a downfall. It can be very yes, like it's useful, but if we give too much of that, then it can become a detriment. And for us coaches, we need to control that and like not let the lifter go to the gym and squat whatever they feel like because depending on the personality, some people want to be too conservative. If they're always too conservative, they're not producing more force and they're not progressing. If that person is also too aggressive, then the RPE rating, they're going to always overshoot and end up in a fatigue hole. So you have to control that, like that loading, that stimulus, so the person's personality doesn't steer the ship in one way or the other. It doesn't steer the ship in less stimulus or doesn't steer the ship into more fatigue that we can recover from. So we need some control, and only having RPE doesn't work. And again, going back to the motion is not about is it useful? Can people use RPE? Can coaches use RPE and make good progress? Yes, the systems do work, but we're talking about is it the true guide? Is it the thing that drives the progress? Which I say it's not. So yeah, I think just focusing on what the stimulus is the biggest thing here because we're not trying to distinguish if our regulation is useful or not. We all agree that our regulation is a useful tool, but the tool itself is not the stimulus or the thing that drives the progress. I think I'll just end it here.
Perfect. So yeah, that was also very clear. And so yeah, now I mean you basically both have up to 12 minutes, so that's quite long, to basically ask each other questions. And so in this case, Chris is going to start. Chris is going to have up to 12 minutes to ask Anas a few questions, and it's only questions. And then Anas is going to have up to 12 minutes to ask Chris some questions. So Chris, whenever you want to start, we can go.
I'll start in 3, 2, 1. So, yeah, so as it pertains to what we are debating about, the prompt that I have here is between RPE and percentage-based training, which is the truer guide to progress than pure percentage-based training RPE, right? So we're looking at both RPE and we're looking at percentage-based training as guides. So I'm making the argument that RPE is the truer guide towards making progress, not only hypertrophy, but also strength gains, adaptations, and so forth. So I actually want to start off with some quotes that you had from your previous podcast here. So you had quoted, sets of 8 may not be the best way to build hypertrophy on squats. You also had quoted, But RPE itself is not the stimulus for anything except hypertrophy, for strength, and other qualities. It doesn't really, it's good to kind of see where we are as far as fatigue cost, but it's also not the same for everyone. So what I want to clarify is, and I want to ask you, I believe that you see percentage based training literally. You see, when you talk about percentage based training being the task, you're seeing it as percentage based training is the specific quantifiable number that you can define as the stimulus. Is that correct?
Yeah, I look at it as force production is the stimulus for strength, not how hard the task is, not how do I perceive this task.
Right. So I think, again, the disconnect here is that RPE is being seen as, it's not being seen as a task, it's being seen as uh, perceptive, right? It's being seen as what's in perception. However, when you work to hit an RP range, um, I have many athletes, we have many athletes, there are many athletes, but specifically in our system where for over a decade, especially the athletes that have been coached to utilize RP in the way that we teach it, um, they use zero percentage based training. They don't use any velocity trackers. They go off of specific RPE. And the way that we utilize RPE is we actually will prescribe detailed RPE ranges per set. So it almost acts as if, in the way I believe that you're describing, um, percentage ranges, right? If you feel worse, you'll go ahead and utilize 75%. If you feel better, maybe you can take 80%, and so on and so forth. I would describe it for myself and how I program it is I utilize RP um, within that relative general concept, but I also teach and educate the lifter about what their force production looks like. Utilizing AMRAPs and so on and so forth, it teaches them what's extremely heavy for you as opposed to what's extremely light for you. So, with that being said, I want to go back to, and when I say this, I'm working to make a point as respectfully as possible. So I really do not want to seem arrogant. I'm just utilizing uh, recent or just impactful results that athletes and coaches from our team have been able to create. So going back to the statement of sets of eight may not be the best way to build hypertrophy on squats. There are actually studies that have shown that purely squatting and the way that you manipulate its intensity shows, I believe the percentage rate was 14.6% production on quad development versus a plethora of accessories utilized, leg press, um, leg extensions, so on and so forth, where I believe it was somewhere around 8.9% of quad strength that was developed. And so with this, I want to correlate and bring this over to, I'm going to say a couple names here. These are current world record squats as we exist today, which is John Garcia, Russell Orhey in the 83 kg class, Russell Orhey in the 93 kg class. Those three squats are 275.5, 338.5, 356. Jesus Olivares, uh, Cranon Warford with 238 keys. Amanda, 84 kg class, 249.5. And then Sonita Mula with this specific number was when she was still working with Joe, still standing at 84 plus class, 318.5. These are six different lifters from the same system that have utilized RPE specifically, zero percentage based training, zero velocity trackers, manipulated what I would describe as brilliantly. And the thing is that I love the fact of how our system is perceived because it's perceived as too simplistic. But what I had just mentioned right now are results and stats that are still standing today that are run from this system. So with this being established, I ask you, with those overwhelming results, the way that sets of eights are utilized with zero percentage based training and with pure RPE based training, I ask you, in what way, shape, or form would you see RPE not the direct stimulus and not the truer guide towards progress as it compares to RPE based training?
Okay, so if I can get this clear, so you're asking me about why do I think the RPE is not the stimulus and like why those lifters, because like you mentioned a study about growth in like in the quads from squatting, which yes, I mean I agree, you can get growth from squatting, but that wasn't the quote. The quote was like what's it's not the best. For us to get the best hypertrophy, we
Yeah,
need
I did quote, sorry to interrupt. I did quote sets of eight, maybe not the best way to build hypertrophy on squats.
yes, and I can give you an example. So let's say for someone like yourself, would you be able to tolerate sets of eight with like 80% of your max like Russ?
So I actually was heavier last year in June, and I ran 3x8s for 4 to 5 blocks straight going into my meet from last June. And the way that we manipulated the intensity, I was able to come in and I believe I PR'd my squat by 15 kg, probably had 5 more keys on the tank. I did
For,
that as a super heavyweight.
okay, so for hypertrophy, we know for you to grow a muscle, that muscle has to be the limiting factor in that exercise, right? So like if you're trying to grow your quads, you wouldn't do an exercise that loads your back, right? So if you look at a squat, and depending on your leverages, and I think Russ would be a bad example because he's very efficient and he stays on his legs the whole time. So it is for him, it is a good hypertrophy exercise. But for someone who leans over, hinges their squat, then the limiting factor is going to be the low back. And if we use RPE, like we have like a set of 8 at a high RPE, then the limiting factor is not going to be the quads here. And like the thing that's going to grow is not the quads. If the purpose is to grow the quads, I'm not going to use a hingy squat to grow the person's quads. I would use a hack squat because it puts most of the mechanical tension on the
My
quads.
apologies for interrupting. So we're arguing between RPE and percentage based training. Which of the two is the truer guide to strength progress?
So okay, with that the guide here, and like if we look at the motion, we're asking about what the stimulus is. You mentioned like the stress. Is the stress the perception, or is the stress the load on the bar you're trying to get out of prescribing that RPE? Because you mentioned in your head, whenever you prescribe a specific RPE, you know the lifter is going to be in a specific intensity zone. Which I'm not arguing the RPE prescription is a bad prescription. It can work, but the driver is not the RPE itself. The driver is the percentage or the load on the bar that you're getting from prescribing that RPE. So I think that's like the disconnect here is not that the system doesn't work. We agree the system works, but we're saying what actually drives the adaptation? Is it the RPE itself, like your perception of how hard that task was, or is it the actual load? Is it the actual mechanical tension that you applied on the body? Is it the actual force you produce? And I argue that it is the force you had to produce, and RPE was just a tool to get you there. It's not the thing that will deliver that. It's not the stimulus itself. It's like a way to prescribe a stimulus, but it's not the stimulus itself. The stimulus itself is the task. It is the task is like
Got it.
loading. Whenever Russ squats 600 plus pounds for a set of 8,
So,
that is the stimulus. If he does the
so,
same RPE with a set of 20, that would not deliver the same stimulus because the load is
so
different.
I just want to make sure that we stay close to what the prompt was. I want to ask Samuel, can you go ahead and repeat what the prompt was that you had sent us?
Yeah, so the prompt in the original document that I sent you was for building maximal strength, the lifter's perceived effort is a truer guide to the training dose than the objective numbers on the bar. The body adapts to the stress it feels, not to the load it can be measured lifting.
Right. So I just want to make, um I believe I have a minute and 15 seconds here.
Yeah,
I just
exactly.
want to make the clear distinction. I want to clarify that I believe you're seeing it as more on the literal sense, but also there might be, I think you used the word disconnect.
Yeah.
I believe that there is a disconnect from your argument because the way that you're seeing it is not from what the prompt states, which is truer guide. So, how are we using RPE? How are we using percentage base? And when using both, which is most effective? Which is being used as a guide to create progress? And so, with 40 seconds, I'll close out with a little bit of time left. The argument that I'm making here is pretty much, or simply, and is RPE is the truer guide. The system of RPE, how it's taught, how it's utilized, is the truer guide than percentage based training because of the fact that with such literal application to athletes, there is a fallacy. It is faulty because of the fact that you are not going to be able to hit those specific percentage bases depending on where variables land on the day. And that's my 12 minutes.
Okay. I guess yeah.
great.
Before I go into mine, so just to be clear about the motion, because I think it's very important to clarify what we mean by truer guide and like what the motion is. So we're asking about what the body actually adapts to. Basically asking about what the stimulus that drives progress is that the thing?
Yeah, basically, like as you can see in the document that I sent you, the first mechanism, the first point is fidelity to the mechanism, for example. So it says, is the adaptive stimulus stress as felt or force as produced? Then there's auditability. So can the coach verify the number or must they take the lifter's word for it? So I think that like probably to come up with an example, the best way to address this would be take a metric like the stress index, right? The stress index is trying to tell you something about the training dose that you're prescribing to the athlete. And so the stress index, we know, works primarily with RPE. And so the point of this debate is a metric like the stress index, which is based upon RPE, the ideal metric on how to monitor whether my athlete is making progress, right? Or would a metric based on percentages, for example, or velocities or whatever, right? In the context of this debate, it was purely about this. So would the alternative be a better metric? Because ultimately, if I used a metric like, I don't know, the number of sets, I think we could argue that only tracking the number of sets wouldn't be enough, right? It wouldn't be very accurate in depicting the amount of progress that the athlete is making. And so in coming up with this metric that accurately tracks the progress of the athlete, what is your idea in terms of RPE versus percentage? This is basically what the core of the debate.
Got it. So basically, does this metric track progress? Is this metric track stimulus or progress that will tell us if it's a true guide or not?
Yeah, exactly. Like how accurately does it track progress in terms of in terms of how biased that is, how far from the core mechanism of strength expression is.
Yeah. Does that how does that sound, Sam? Chris? As far as like the true guide, does that clarify like what the
Yeah, I believe it just goes back to how the prompt is being
interpreted?
perceived. So as I understood it, it was pretty much based. The argument was, do you utilize percentage or do you utilize RPE, and which one is a truer guide towards proving best progress?
I guess to ask you, okay, since like I'll just take my time here to ask you some questions to clarify. So how would you define a truer guide?
So in the sense that I believe it's being seen from your end, it's the literal sense. So it's the percentage. The way that I am perceiving it, the way that I'm utilizing it is truer in the sense of what has shown in case studies, what has shown over time to be the most impactful for progress.
Okay. And like the criteria about tracking progress, as far as like a tracking metric, and as far as like how closely it is to the task itself, or the stimulus, because like you mentioned the stimulus and the stress, does that not relate? Does not cover? That doesn't go under the true guide?
So we can make the argument of we can measure progress through, and many times coaches and athletes agree upon this. Where let's say you set a specific percentage base, right? And they say, hey, I'm hitting percentage base at RPE 8, 9, or 10. Now we're getting stronger, and this specific same percentage from this one RM is now moving at an RPE of 5, 6, or 7. This alone is a way you can utilize tracking. They both go hand in hand, but RPE indeed can be used as the tool in tracking.
Okay. I'll ask you a follow-up question. Can you use RPE on its own, decoupled from load, to track progress? So you don't know load; you just see the RPE on the bar. You just see the the RPE ratings of the lifter from week to week. But that's the only thing you see, because if we want to see if that metric is the best metric to track progress, we have to kind of isolate it by itself. So when we isolate RPE, can you track the person's progress looking at RPE only?
This is going to be something that may make many coaches uncomfortable, or it may blow their mind, or it may make them cringe. But we have done so, and we have taken lifters that have been so neurotic or so emotional about their training where load, I have had blocks where we didn't talk about a load the entire block. All they did was trust the navigation, and when they were blown away from only utilizing and visualizing or seeing bar speed. We didn't talk about load. They didn't. I literally would give them colors. I would give them, or I would have their friends load it for them. I've done this before. They had no idea what the loads were for a whole block.
But you did.
Eliminated. What was that?
But you did. You did. You knew what the load was.
I did, but they didn't.
So
So
the
so
question,
so
just
all they
sorry
all
to
they
interrupt
saw.
you. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, because like I want to make sure like the question itself is like we're not getting sidetracked. I'm asking, can you just use the RPE itself? Like the lifter reports to you, I hit an RPE 7 single today, and that's it without the load. Is that a good way of tracking progress
We have done that before.
without knowing the load?
Yes.
Well, how do you know they're making progress?
Because at the end of the block we looked at what the loads were because we right, but the thing is that you're talking about there is a literal component here that has absolutely no idea what the load is. So the athlete was not the navigator of the training, it was the coach. And so in that it was, as obviously we don't do this all year round, or I don't do this all year round, but there have been cases where this has been done to where there was no knowledge of what the load was. We were going strictly off of sight and feel, and it was to prove a point. We utilize percentage base in the last podcast. We talked about how we'll prescribe an RPE, and then in the back down sets, we'll apply some percentage based training to drop down from what that perception is on the top set load. But what I'm arguing, and again, this is all going back to how we see the prompt, how we're defining the prompt. I'm looking at what was said in the prompt as truer guide as to progress. Truer meaning what is the best way or best proven way towards progress between RPE and our percentage based training. And I cited through those three names, Helms, Grams, and Cleather, how RPE groups far exceeded, in many cases, higher percentages of progress than the groups utilizing pure percentage based training.
Yeah, I think there's a okay. I think you're conflating here. Like, what's the thing that's actually driving the progress? In that study, they were trying to see if auto regulation gives better progress. Just not the metric itself, not RPE itself. They're not tracking the RPE itself. They're tracking autoregulation. When a lifter autoregulates, do they make better progress than a person who is very strict? And yes, in that sense, autoregulation is superior. But we're not talking about this. We're talking about what actually drives the progress. If you had the same people autoregulating, but the load on the bar is not present, then the progress will not be there. That's like the whole,
So
yeah.
so when the body is experiencing RPE, right? Is that not a stimulus? Is RP wouldn't RP is not a stimulus?
RPE is a stimulus, but does not tell us about the force reduction, which is the goal here. The prompt is about maximal strength. And if we want to, let's say a lifter comes in after like a long day of work, they've ran a marathon, very depleted, then they squat 50% of their max at RPE 9. Is that the same stimulus as if the person is fresh, they come in and squat 95% RPE 9? It's
Yeah,
not.
clearly those are different stimulus, but
Yes.
um, in one of your quotes, you talked about how RPE is used as a gauge for fatigue. There's also a study that clearly breaks down how the body is adapting to relative stimulus and it does not know the set number, doesn't know it at all. And so, with that being said, the nervous system is what's being manipulated by a relative stimulus, but it is indeed feeling that stimulus. Although it's a range and it may be perceived as a little broader, it's still a stimulus. So, because of that, yes, you can use RPE towards how you manipulate for hypertrophic development, but also it is used for making the nervous system adapt. The nervous system is something that it is adapting towards the stress that you provide. It has no idea of what you're making the argument is the truer guide of that percentage, right? Like you're saying 78% is exactly what is driving progress, right? Again, I just keep
Force
using
reduction.
that number for an example. But the thing is that the body does not know that at all. And the body is going to adapt towards whatever stimulus it's feeling, which is within a relative range. 79% can do it for some lifters, 82% can do it for some lifters, but it's just trying to survive. So within that state of homeostasis, it's going to adapt and make progress.
Okay, so two things here. I think the maybe we're going over time, but a couple of things here. You mentioned that the body doesn't know. So the body does know because there are mechanoreceptors on the muscle cell that feels stress, that feels a stretch, that feels mechanical tension. So the more load you put on the bar, guess what? Those mechanoreceptors are going to sense more mechanical tension. They're going to react to it. So the body does know what mechanical tension is, and as it increases,
I'm
it
not
also
arguing
senses
that.
that.
I'm arguing in terms of you're saying specific percentage numerical
But there's a difference.
identification of stress.
Yeah, but there's a difference. Like the idea here is the more the mechanical tension increases, the more those mechanoreceptors have to respond. And that tells you like it will know if this is like less mechanical tension or like a lower percentage than a higher percentage because it will start to lengthen and respond. So that does tell you that the body knows if there is mechanical tension,
It
which is
knows it
not.
in a
It's not.
relative sense, but not in a specific sense. The body's not going to say, "Hey, I'm getting exactly 78% and I'm going to adapt to this." And also, I make the argument the percentage changes as the lifter gets deeper into the career. The higher the training age is, what used to work with you within this percentile range, that changes.
I agree, but we're not talking about that. We're not. We're talking about absolute load. We're talking about objective loading, not
Yeah,
relative percentages.
I'm using that in argument of because you're saying the truer guide.
Yeah, and I
I'm
think if we,
using
if
that.
we established,
I'm using that as in we're talking about malleability. We're talking about how RPE is more flexible and dynamic, and so in that case, I'm correlating that over to where that is going to be crucial, especially as the lifter gets deeper into the career. You need malleability. You need to be dynamic, and those set specific percentage based training philosophies do have their fallacies. So.
Yes, I definitely agree, but I think we keep going on tangents that don't relate to the motion itself. And if we look at the truer guide and the criteria we have for it, tracking progress is one of them. And like I mentioned, if we only look at RPE regardless of load, we cannot really track progress because I can hit an RPE 7 today, it's 200 kilos. I can hit an RPE 8 next week, and it's 180 kilos. Does that mean I'm making progress? The RPE is going up, load is going down. That doesn't mean I'm making progress. And you can't really tell if you're making progress just by looking at the RPE itself. We have to couple it with load. And like you mentioned, you always have to look at load. Like you, at the end of the block, you look at the load again to see if we made progress, which is one criteria that we mentioned. Is like, does it track the progress? Does it track the progress of the goal here, which is developing maximal strength? And if you take load out of the equation, then you have no way of tracking progress, which is one of the criterias for truer guide. But we can look at it the other way, where we look at the load itself. I'm just only tracking load on the bar. I can see how it trends. And if I have also velocity, I can see the force reduction trends. That is an objective way of tracking progress. That is the best way of tracking progress, which means it's a better metric to track progress, which is one of the criterias for a truer guide. So it beats RPE in that sense.
So what happens if you don't have those metrics to utilize and you can only use RPE?
I will have no idea if the person is progressing or not because I don't know how much force they're producing. I don't know how much load they're lifting. They might be going downhill. They might be progressing. They might be stagnating. I have nothing to track progress with because we don't know how much weight they're lifting, which is the whole point of powerlifting.
Are you not able to? You can track progress based off of, we take it down to extremely simplistic terms. You can track progress by seeing the bar speed before you even know the numbers. You can, again, I'm not saying that those are specific numbers that you're utilizing for predictability, and they're very useful. When we're talking about truer guide, before you even get to those numbers, you and a lifter can look at each other when you guys make progress, when you guys PR, and you can say, this moved faster than it ever has before, and this was determined based off of the bar speed. But I also believe that there's just a distinction in the way that we saw the prompt. I believe that's being clarified now. The way that you're looking at it is more of a literal term. What is the specific truer guide in terms of the percentage? Which I understand that. The way that I was looking at truer guide is simply which proves best in terms of greater progress over the longevity of both systems being utilized.
I think that will be like a hard way of arguing because you have to reference different people and like their success, but that doesn't really tell us about the tool itself. We're gonna have to isolate the tool away from the success people have had. Obviously, you guys have
Still,
great coaching
I'd
and
agree.
you use that that metric, but it's not the way we would test or compare two metrics. We have to kind of isolate them and see which one is a better metric to track progress, or which one is a better metric to like track the task that we're trying to drive. And like I mentioned, every time you mention RPE and the progress, load is always coupled with it. Well, we can take out RPE and still get a good metric or like a good way of tracking progress. And that is only one criteria under a truer guide, which was mentioned in the like in the what is it called, in the doc that Sam sent us, which is like the thing I was going by.
Yeah, sorry guys for interrupting. We're gonna have some time for a Q&A later. It's time for a closing statement. So, Chris, you basically have up to 4 minutes to make your closing statement as best as possible and support your case.
Get my timer here. So in my closing statement, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. In my closing statement, I will reference to a study with a doctor named Zordos in 2016. Lifters. So when working with lifters, especially novice lifters, lifters can commonly perceive certain based training or percentage based training, and the way that they would perceive it is, let's say you set a percentage for them, or let's say you set said range for them to make progress. Oftentimes, novice lifters are subject to two things: what they are feeling, they will believe what is quote unquote at 8. They will go ahead and believe that it is actually uh, at 8. The way that it could be taught without any percentage based training, um, I would argue that we have done over a plethora of years utilizing zero percentage based training. We have taught them how to perceive bar speed, how to perceive feel, but also again mostly sight, and how they utilize that as one simplistic tool in order to navigate their training. Um, the same thing can be applied to experienced lifters, and once they get to a very experienced level of training, we have many lifters on our roster that are utilizing that same style, that same philosophy, and with that making tremendous progress till this day. Uh, like I stated before, through Helms, he concludes uh, wide target ranges with RIR or RPE have proven uh, to make greater progress than percentage based training. And with that being said, percentage based training is something that you do utilize uh, in order to define as a specific metric for what the body is experiencing. But again, it is not as dynamic, it is not as malleable, nor is it as consistent when taught correctly for adherence. And when comparing the two with many case studies through specific experience, it is shown that there is an overwhelming amount of data, statistics, that RPE based training is indeed more impactful and the truer guide than percentage based training. Uh, I believe that, like I said before, what we're arguing may be seen as two different prompts, but based off of the way that the prompt was given, which is the truer guide, meaning which provides the most progress. I believe that I've made the case in that RPE based training, because of its dynamic ability, has proven, and through the case studies that and the studies in general that I've stated, has proven an overwhelming amount of progress, not only to hypertrophic development, but also central nervous system development, which also is what drives strength progression. And with that, I will close with 15 seconds left. Appreciate you, Samuel, for having me be on. Anas, I appreciate you for this debate, and I give my time over back.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, Anas, you have up to 4 minutes to come up with your closing statement, and then I see that a few people are connected, so we're gonna have a few minutes for some questions.
Okay, so for my closing statement, going off of the motion we had and the criteria that is stated from Sam, we had a few things to measure how true of a guide it is, and we talked about a few of them. We mentioned how closely does it track progress, and with that, we see that RPE is inferior to tracking progress because load is the thing that we are tracking. That is the thing that will tell us if we are making progress or not. I know with every time Chris mentioned RPE, load was always coupled with it. So RPE cannot get decoupled from loading, but we can do the other way. We can go the other way around. We can decouple loading from the RPE and still track progress. And as far as like the stimulus goes, there are many studies, actually a meta-regression by Robinson, shout out Data-Driven Strength. They found that the relationship between reps in reserve or RPE and strength gains were negligible. So, and for us to see what the thing that drives strength is, we have to kind of isolate that variable and kind of have the same RPE and do it with different percentage ranges and see if it provides the same stimulus. If the same RPE with different load ranges provides the same gains, then that tells you that is a driver for strength. But that's not what we saw. We saw the biggest driver is when load increases and RPE increases with it. That's where strength gains occur, just because the stimulus is not the RPE itself. The gains or the adaptations respond to the changes in loading on the bar, which is like one of the criteria is here. It's like, how does it track? How closely is it to the stimulus? And like with that kind of proves that it's not necessarily RPE that drives the adaptations. It is the load itself. We're not arguing that our regulation is not useful and like coaches cannot use it. You can definitely can. A lot of case studies use it. I personally still use RPE, but I know it's not the driver of the strength. I know the thing that will drive the strength is if I see the force production increase and the load on the bar increase. So following that criteria, that disqualifies RPE as a truer guide, because on its own, it cannot stand. Only tracking RPE does not tell us anything about rate of progress, but only tracking load on the bar does tell us if the person is progressing or not, which is, yeah, I'll just end it here. That is why I think load is the stimulus, not the perception of how hard that task is, which is, like, I guess, like that was the motion here. What is the stimulus for progress? Not, is this a useful tool or not? It's definitely a useful tool. I'm not disagreeing with that, but yeah, I'll just end it here. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you both, guys. So yeah, I mean, we have quite a few people connected live. Let's see if anyone has questions. Otherwise, I have a couple. So maybe I can get started and see whether someone adds a question. But so one question that I have for you is to put some context around this, and I want to ask this question to both of you. In terms of the impact that these specific aspect of training has on long-term success. Like, do you think that these specific motion makes a huge difference in how athletes are trained? That is, Chris, do you believe that if you started training athletes with percentages and started seeing, RPE not as the true guide of training progress, but something different, do you think that it would change dramatically the impact of your athletes' success? And same for you and us. Like, if you could only program with RPE and stop tracking success in the way you do now, like, do you think that would make like a 5% difference, a 40% difference, all the difference in the world? So what do you guys think about that?
Anas, you can go. That's fine.
Okay, yeah, so for me, I think if in that sense, like that you mentioned, if I only track RPE and not look at load, then that will change, that will change at 180 degrees, because I will have no idea what's working and what's not. I do track both at the same time, and I use RPE, but knowing what the stimulus to progress definitely plays a big, definitely changes how I coach, because if I know the thing that will drive progress in a hypertrophy sense is proximity to failure, and we've seen a lot of studies that show proximity to failure does have a correlation with hypertrophy, I'm like, okay, the goal here is to push this muscle that close to failure. That is the thing that will drive the progress. But since we've seen that RPE itself, even like from our experience, people get stronger doing lower RPEs, but people don't get stronger doing 30% of their percentage one rep max. So like that is like the biggest thing. I think if I don't track load at all, there's no way I can operate, because I wouldn't know if I'm making progress or not.
And question B would be, what if you can still track training as you do now, but you only prescribe RPE? Like, your athletes can only train with RPE. Basically, you have to start using, Chris's approach. And then, afterwards, you can track. what the athlete did, and you can come up with your own metrics. So what do you think about that?
So I do want to answer question A, but before I do, I want to ask both of you, uh, when you're looking at load, the number load, that's literally obviously a load. But if you're not utilizing percentage, right, as a metric, so we have the load, right? Let's say it is neutral to both cases being made, right? So you have percentage and you have RPE. The number load that you have on the bar obviously is a definite load, but you don't do the math. You have no idea of what percentage it is. So you're utilizing RPE with the literal load that it is 205 kilograms, right? But you don't know the percentage that it is to the 1 rep max. And also in times of training, as a lifter is actively getting stronger throughout short periods of time, their 1 RM is changing. Therefore, that percentage is changing. So with that being said, uh, yes, if you're looking at the load being specifically the number, yes, it's going to be very difficult if you don't know the numerical representative um, on the bar, right? But we do know that because it's right in front of our face and we get to see that. It's not like we're trying to make it harder for ourselves to make progress. We see 205 kilograms on a bar. We do not see on the bar where there's a hologram projecting 78% of your 1 RM. So with that being said, um, answering question A, metrics depend on how well each coach uses said metric. I think that's like crucial. I actually know that's crucial. Throughout time, hearing coaches uh, define their systems and their philosophies, it's important that coaches utilize what they feel is best to help athletes make best progress. Um, I know that it is uncomfortable for many coaches to not have certain specific metrics of tracking, hence percentage or velocity, and so they utilize what they feel helps them make training most predictable. Again, we do use percentage based training. It is helpful, but I believe that we have, and many other coaches as well, have done really great jobs of learning how to teach athletes how to utilize RPE in its best form of mastery. And there are lifters like Jonathan Kaiko. There are lifters like my own. I have his name's William Mangiamele, also known as Forklift Billy. With these lifters, there's been many times where we've had consecutive blocks where we've taken a lot of the funk, a lot of the clouding out of their ability to make progress. For Forklift Billy, for example, I've programmed the past couple blocks. We took load caps out specifically. We took percentages out specifically. I manipulated RPE as the stimulus, as the intensity that they will be feeling based off what he perceives. So he'll load that number based off what he believes is RP 6, 7, whatever the case may be. We have zero understanding or knowing or any computing of percentage at all. And he's made linear progress with RPE that was very adaptable. We then were able to look back after and take a look at and compare percentage wise how much actual progress you were making. However, in that 4 week period where we were going through the block, we were using strict RPE and we were navigating that for specific sets. And so again, I think it just goes back to it just depends on which coach utilizes which metric of navigation and who feels most comfortable with doing so. Like I went and watched the podcast with Kedrick where he was talking about his debate where he was talking about there's probably not a lot of coaches today that are using velocity trackers in the way that Kedrick and Emil Krastev like to utilize it. There are some that are using it, but I would make the argument that there's a great deal of lifters that are not using velocity trackers, and we are using percentage, but we're not using it as the end all be all. But there are coaches like probably Anas who likes the specific numerical metric to track in that sense, which is great. There are coaches like myself and others uh, on my roster that are just strictly using RPE. We can go back and look back at the numbers, but in the time that we're working, we're going specifically off RPE. Can you go ahead and repeat your question B?
Yeah, so my question was, do you think you could make substantial progress with an athlete of yours by only using percentages from now on?
By only using percentage?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, yeah.
I believe you can. The but I believe it has a limit.
And in terms of percentage, like how much of an impact do you think this would have in terms of negative impact on an athlete? Like, do you think Russell Horry would be much weaker now
Yeah,
or
so
slightly weaker?
so again, and so this is the argument I make. There are lifters you're going to try to give them percentage based training and they're going to get very frustrated. They're going to start to become very emotional. Now you might have a specific type of um, personality trait, right? Depending on type A, type B, where, or you might have the more intellectual type that's very curious and they want to know the specific number, right? And they're very intricate. There's going to be other athletes that they don't want to know these numbers. They don't want to compute during training. They don't want to think during training. They just want to flow through training. So creating a system and how you set up that system for that athlete to make progress is very important. Um, there are lifters where I've had many lifters where I only utilize RPE based training because of that specific reasoning. There are other lifters where they enjoy the percentage based training and they like to know the specificity of the exact relative range of where they are to where their old one R at max is. But again, I do make that argument that your old one R at max it limits you because as you get stronger, that's no longer your one R at max, and you can get into a place where percentage based training starts to really understimulate.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, so basically you're saying, for example, Russ would be quite a bit weaker if you guys had trained him with percentages only.
I would say that depending on the personality type and the way that the lifter likes to navigate training and how they perceive understanding the system,
Mm-hmm.
uh, there are more lifters with percentage based training will likely understimulate and or not understand the functions of recovering and variables, therefore only utilizing I can see where maybe if you're setting a range of percentages, but then again, that range of if you're giving 75 to 80%, that is essentially, I make the argument that's general. It's an RPE, it's a relative range, it's a relative stimulus. It's if you're using a specific percentage base, that can get not only tricky but also dangerous or regressive.
Mm-hmm. And Anas, same question to you. Do you think you could still using you could still make progress by using your metrics, but only like after training was done? Because in this case, you prescribe training only with RPE from now on.
Yeah, I think for some lifters, it's almost impossible because we do work that is not even on the RPE scale. So I can't really prescribe them like an RPE two, because like I know this person needs to squat somewhere between like 60 and 65%, but on an RPE scale, it does not show up. So like I think it does limit some of my lifters. Some other lifters, I think I can do RPE only because they operate in that RPE 6 plus, which is like a little bit more accurate. But if you're prescribing RPE 5 and below, it becomes very cloudy. It gets kind of hard to tell like what's an RPE 4, what's an RPE 3. So like I think in that sense, it can limit some people. Where with percentages or like objective load or objective load ranges, I can control how much I want that person to load on that day. So I can definitely do it. I mean, I've done it in the past, and I think it's useful. But also, the it has like it gives too much control, and like I think it's like it's a wider range because like an RPE 7 can probably be like plus or minus 10%, which is very wide. And I think I want to control that range. That worst case scenario, if you feel this bad, just go only 3% below. So like we can actually control that stimulus. But yeah, it's definitely something I can do. But like I said, we always refer to loading when it comes to progression. Like that's like the RPE in that sense, everyone uses it in a way that, okay, I'm giving you this RPE, I'm expecting you to be in this range of loading, which is like the thing we want to see. So it's a different way of prescribing those ranges, but I think again, like RPE by itself without seeing the load, then like it wouldn't work. But yeah, like that's the case here.
I was talking to John Song about this a while ago, and he prefers RPE. He almost only programs with RPE, and he was saying that, and I'm interested in what you guys think about this. He says that he places a very high value on his lifters developing autonomy over time. That is, he wants them to become more and more autonomous to the point where they understand like what is going on. They can make educated choices during training, and he also said that he allows them to make mistakes so that they learn from those mistakes. Right? What do you guys think about this? I'm interested in your opinion about this.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that's very useful. Like, it's a skill that is important. Like, I think most lifters need that skill. You need the lifter IQ so the person does not make the wrong decision. So, like, it's definitely like a useful skill to have. But again, like going back to like the whole discussion here, it's not about the skills or like can this be helpful? Can this be useful? Can we use RPE only? Yes, we can do that, but it's just like more about okay, what actually drives the progress, and like that's like where like some confusion was. I'm like, okay, well, no one is arguing here about like those skills or like RPE usefulness. Everyone agrees that it's useful. Everyone tracks it, but we're talking okay, what's actually driving the progress here? And I think even for John, like he would look at the weight on the bar and like he would look at how the bar is moving. We're tracking all these metrics at the same time, and you want the lifter to have that skill because you don't want to hold their hand like at every step of the way. You want them to be able to make decisions on their own if they're not feeling amazing. Maybe they can even get out of that RPE zone or the load percentage zone. But that's like the lifter being skillful. So we're not yeah like we don't disagree on that point. I don't think.
Yeah, I believe that again going back to the prompt, I believe that the conversation is really how you see the prompt, literal versus conceptual and philosophical, and how it carries over, to greater progress. I mean, it just depends on how you frame it, and then from there you'd have to make your point. But again, I want this to be clear that I think I know what's most important is percentage based training, velocity tracking is exceptional, uh, especially when the coach really understands how to utilize that system. It has also been proven that RPE based training in multiple coaches that we've mentioned, Mike Teixeira, John Song, Joseph Frenzo, um, it's also been proven to be highly effective as well. Uh, One of the arguments that I make is that when you're trying to gauge or like create predictability or not give the lifter too much control, is that when you give a percentage range, that essentially to me is saying that it's relative. Therefore, the body doesn't know that it's the differentiation between 75 to 80%. Therefore, you could make the argument that it is essentially an RPE. Yes, in literal terms, no, it's not. I'm giving a percentage range, but that's where I go back to the body doesn't know the difference. Does the body know that it is experiencing a stimulus? Yes. But it doesn't know the set numerical value of what that stimulus is. And so, with that being said, again, I just want to get back to establishing these truths. Both systems can be utilized well. It really depends on how well the coach understands their system and how they're able to teach that to the lifter. Um, I do know of some coaches that do like to keep a particular amount of balance between flexibility for the lifter and navigating the training and also control from the coach. And many times, control from a coach is not to restrict a lifter, but it's in other words, I would term it as healthy restriction to keep the lifter safe and progressing, especially when the lifter is just not able to see their training in the way that the coach can see it. And it is our job to educate that athlete on the system and how to navigate their training to make their progress. So I just want that to be clearly understood amongst the audience. Uh, Percentage-based training and RPE clearly work, but again, with the prompt, it really just comes down to how you are perceiving the prompt. I think we've clarified that in this debate here. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think, ultimately I think, even though there was some misunderstanding at some point, we did still manage to address both points. That is, both versions of how the prompt could be interpreted. So I think
Mhm.
this was still pretty productive. And yeah, and I see that someone is asking about autonomy of the lifter, and we already covered that. So
Mhm.
yeah, guys, if you don't have anything to add, I think we can stop here. I think this was really productive, um, and I think it's gonna be a lot of food for thoughts for the listeners.
Yeah, I
Nice.
think that was good. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Really enjoyed it. I actually watched your podcast too. That was really good. Yeah, so definitely enjoyed this debate. Nothing obviously like from like when people kind of go back and forth, like it may look like that we're like not having like the best time, but it is just like for the
Of
just
course.
for the debate itself. Like obviously, like, this is all friendly. Like none of it hopefully none of it comes out as malicious or anything.
No, not at all. I appreciate you for coming on. I had a great time. I believe that this format is actually excellent. I think it's great for lifters to see their own coaches come on and kind of expand on their thoughts and see what's the thinking between their systems and like, what am I doing in my program? I never really get to see my coach expand on this in the public with other coaches, especially if we're from, two contrasting or differentiating philosophies. Obviously, even though you're on one side and I'm on another side, we both are proving that we're able to create results for athletes, and I think that's the beautiful part about this format. So yeah, I really appreciate both you, Anas and Samuel, for having this format and having me on, and I always look forward to these. So thanks, guys.
Yeah, and I think it's not as different as you think. We definitely are closer, like to the because like I do track RPE as well. I prescribe it, and like you also track loading on the bar. So it's like it's closer than what people think. We're not like in two different like zones here. Definitely like a lot closer than what people think. But I guess like the application might be a little bit different here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, thank you again, guys, and thank you everyone for listening. And yeah, stay tuned for the next debate.
Thank you guys.